Try to imagine you are sailing across the Mediterranean more than 2,000 years ago. No GPS, no radar, no digital maps, no modern lights powerful enough to cut through the darkness. Ahead of you is nothing but a dark sea. In the distance, there is a coastline so low and flat that it is almost impossible to see from offshore. But you know that somewhere ahead is one of the richest and most important cities in the ancient world, Alexandria. The problem is, how do you find the harbor after nightfall? How do you know you are heading in the right direction? And how do you avoid the shallow waters, rocky areas, and dangerous reefs around the harbor entrance? More than 2,000 years ago, people had an answer. They built a massive tower on the island of Pharos, a structure believed to have stood more than 100 meters tall. It stood beside the sea like a gigantic landmark, guiding ships toward Alexandria. The Greeks called the island Pharos, and eventually, the name Pharos became a word used to describe lighthouses themselves in several languages. But the strangest thing is not that it once existed. It is that, today the tower has almost completely disappeared. It was once one of the most famous structures in the ancient world. It stood beside the harbor of Alexandria for centuries. It eventually became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But in the end, the sea, time, and a series of earthquakes erased it from the horizon. So, what did the Lighthouse of Alexandria really look like? How did the ancient people build it? And why could a structure survive for more than 1,000 years, only to eventually disappear? This is the story of one of the most mysterious wonders ever built by humankind. The city born from Alexander's dream. To understand why the Lighthouse of Alexandria was built, we have to go back to 331 BC. That was the year Alexander the Great laid the foundations of the city of Alexandria in Egypt. At the time, Alexander was at the height of his power. He had defeated the Persian Empire and entered Egypt. But Alexandria was not simply a city built to commemorate a victory. It was established in a location of extraordinary strategic importance, near the Nile Delta, facing the Mediterranean, and in a position that allowed it to grow into a major maritime center. Alexander wanted to create a city that could connect the Greek world with Egypt and the lands to the east. But there was a paradox. The man who laid the foundations of Alexandria would not live long enough to see the city reach its greatest heights. Alexander the Great died in 323 BC. Only a few years after the city was founded, his successors continued to develop Alexandria, most notably the Ptolemaic dynasty. And very quickly, Alexandria became one of the most important centers of trade, culture, and knowledge in the ancient world. Ships from across the Mediterranean continually arrived here. Goods flowed into the harbor. People came from many different cultures. The city grew increasingly wealthy, and that growth created a new problem. The harbor of Alexandria needed a landmark large enough for ships offshore to see. The coastline here was relatively low. From a distance, the land offered no prominent natural landmark. At night or in bad weather, finding the correct entrance to the harbor could become dangerous. The shallow waters and hidden rocks made approaching Alexandria even more difficult. So, on a small island lying just offshore from the harbor, a structure unprecedented in scale began to rise, the island of Pharos. And on the island of Pharos, a gigantic tower began reaching toward the sky. The island of Pharos and the giant tower. Today, when we look at modern cities, it is easy to forget that building a massive structure on an island more than 2,000 years ago was an almost extraordinary undertaking. Pharos lay just offshore from the harbor of Alexandria. To connect the island to the mainland, the ancient builders constructed a massive causeway known as the Heptastadion. This causeway stretched for about 1.2 kilometers. It did more than simply connect Alexandria to Pharos. It also helped shape the city's harbor system. And at the far end of the island, the lighthouse began to appear. Ancient sources tell us that the structure was built under the Ptolemaic kings. Ptolemy I is generally credited with initiating the project. The structure was completed under his son, Ptolemy I, sometime in the early 3rd century BC. Some ancient sources associate the project with the architect Sostratus of Cnidus. But even the exact identity of its designer is not completely certain. What we do know is that this was not a small lighthouse. It was a monumental structure, a massive piece of architecture designed to be visible from a great distance. Modern estimates generally place its height at more than 100 meters. Some sources suggest an even greater height, but no figure is completely certain because the lighthouse is gone. We cannot stand beside it today and measure it. What remains are ancient descriptions, images on coins, writings from scholars, and archaeological remains beneath the sea. And that is why, every time we reconstruct the Lighthouse of Alexandria, we are essentially trying to piece together a puzzle that has been lost for more than 1,000 years. The three-tiered structure. One of the most remarkable things about the Lighthouse of Alexandria was its basic design. Many sources describe it as having three main sections. The lower section was square, the middle section was octagonal, and the upper section was circular or nearly circular. Three architectural blocks stacked on top of one another. As the structure rose higher, it gradually became narrower. This not only gave the lighthouse its distinctive appearance, it also reduced the weight of the structure at higher levels and helped create a more stable design. The lower section may have contained rooms and areas used for operating the lighthouse. An internal system of ramps or stairways allowed people and supplies to move up to the higher levels. Some medieval descriptions even claim that the passageways were wide enough for two mounted riders to pass each other. But remember, these descriptions were written many centuries after the structure was built, so we cannot treat every detail as completely certain. And that is exactly what makes the Lighthouse of Alexandria so fascinating. We know it existed, we know it was enormous, we know its basic structure, but the deeper we go into the details, the more questions emerge. What exactly did the top look like? How was the fire arranged? Did a mirror really exist? And how far could its light actually be seen? These questions have remained for centuries, and among them, there is one particularly fascinating question. How did the ancient people create a light powerful enough to guide ships through the darkness? The secret of the light. This is perhaps the most famous part of the story of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. According to ancient sources, a fire was maintained at the top of the structure. Its purpose was clear: to help ships identify the location of the harbor. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder also described the Lighthouse of Alexandria as serving the purpose of using light at night to warn ships of dangerous waters and guide them toward the harbor entrance. But there is an even more fascinating detail. Later sources mention a mirror placed at the top. The mirror was said to be capable of reflecting light. Some later stories even claim that it could reflect sunlight during the day and help extend the visibility of the fire at night. But here, we need to distinguish between history and legend. There is not enough solid evidence to confirm that the Lighthouse of Alexandria possessed a gigantic mirror capable of reflecting light across extraordinary distances, as some later stories claimed. Researchers today still debate exactly how the lighting system worked. What is more certain is that the ancient builders understood one very simple principle. If you want a light to be seen from far away, raise it as high as possible. And that is exactly what the Lighthouse of Alexandria did. It raised the fire hundreds of feet above sea level. No electricity, no modern lamps. Just architecture, fuel, height, and maritime knowledge. Humans transformed a simple fire into a landmark that could help ships find their way. And that is what made this structure a wonder. Not simply because it was tall, but because it solved a practical problem using the technology of its own time. A wonder built for more than admiration. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was not built simply to be a beautiful structure. It had a purpose: to protect and guide those who traveled by sea. Alexandria was becoming an increasingly important center of trade. Ships carried goods into the city. Other vessels departed the harbor to continue their journeys across the Mediterranean. Every ship that safely reached the harbor had economic significance. And so, a great lighthouse could become part of a city's commercial power. That is why the Lighthouse of Alexandria was more than just an engineering achievement. It was also a symbol of power. Think about it. A sailor approaching from far away sees a massive tower rising above the horizon. He knows that Alexandria is ahead, the harbor is ahead, and behind that light lies one of the wealthiest cities in the ancient world. Perhaps that is why the Lighthouse of Alexandria quickly became a symbol. It appeared on coins. It was depicted in works of art, and its reputation spread throughout the Mediterranean. It was no longer just a tool. It became an image representing Alexandria itself, a city facing the sea, a city of commerce, a city of knowledge, and a city determined to prove that human beings could build things that once seemed impossible. 1,000 years against time. But no structure can stand forever. The Lighthouse of Alexandria survived for an astonishing length of time. Centuries passed, kings changed, empires changed, religions changed, Alexandria changed as well. But the tower remained standing. It witnessed the transition from the Greek world to the Roman world. It witnessed Alexandria transform through countless eras. And it continued to appear in the records of scholars and travelers. But then, an enemy that its builders could never control began to emerge. Earthquakes. Alexandria lies in a region with significant seismic activity. Earthquakes over the centuries repeatedly damaged the structure. An earthquake in 796 was recorded as causing severe damage. Earthquakes in the 10th century continued to weaken the structure. Then, major earthquakes in 1303 and the years that followed continued to devastate the lighthouse. Parts of the structure were destroyed. Entire sections collapsed. But for a time, it still stood. Until one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world was reduced to nothing more than scattered ruins. The death of a wonder. By the 14th century, the Lighthouse of Alexandria had become almost nothing more than a ruin. When the traveler Ibn Battuta visited Alexandria during this century, the structure was already in a severely deteriorated state. Earthquakes continued to weaken what remained of the tower, and eventually, the lighthouse disappeared from the horizon. But the story did not end there, because its stones were still there. In the 15th century, Sultan Kitbey built a fortress on the site where the lighthouse had once stood. Many of the stones from the old structure are believed to have been reused, and the citadel of Kitbey still stands today. This creates a strange paradox. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world disappeared, yet what remained of it may have become part of the very structure that stands on its foundations today. But the lighthouse did not disappear completely. If you think that there is nothing left for us to learn about the Lighthouse of Alexandria today, then that would be a mistake, because parts of it may still be lying beneath the sea. Over the centuries, Alexandria's coastline has changed. Sea levels have risen, the land has shifted. Coastal structures collapsed and were swallowed by the sea. Underwater archaeological excavations have uncovered thousands of artifacts and architectural blocks around the ancient harbor of Alexandria. Some of these massive stone blocks may be connected to the area of the lighthouse, but determining exactly which structure each piece belonged to remains a difficult challenge. Archaeologists have to piece together fragments of evidence, a block of stone beneath the sea, an image on an ancient coin, a description by an ancient geographer, a text written by a medieval traveler, a mosaic, a surviving piece of architecture. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, the image of the Lighthouse of Alexandria is reconstructed. That is what makes archaeology so fascinating. Sometimes, we do not find an entire structure, we find only fragments. And from those fragments, we try to recover the memory of a world that has disappeared. The legend of the hidden treasure. But there is another story about the fall of the lighthouse. A story very different from the accounts of earthquakes. According to a legend recorded by some medieval Arab writers, a Byzantine man attempted to gain access to the foundations of the lighthouse. He was said to have converted, gained the trust of the authorities, and convinced them to allow him to search for a secret treasure believed to be hidden beneath the structure. But the search was supposedly what weakened the foundations, and the lighthouse collapsed. The man then escaped by ship. The story sounds like something straight out of an adventure movie. But there is one important point. This is a legend, not solid evidence of what caused the lighthouse to collapse. Historical and geological evidence indicates that earthquakes played a major role in the structure's decline. So the treasure story should be viewed as part of the mythology surrounding the lighthouse, rather than a certain explanation for its destruction. And perhaps, the very existence of stories like this shows just how powerful an impression the lighthouse once made. When a great structure disappears, people begin creating stories to explain why it vanished. The wonder disappeared, but the name remained. Today, if you stand along the coast of Alexandria, you will no longer see the massive tower that once astonished sailors. No fire, no towering white structure standing out against the horizon, no tiers of architecture reaching toward the sky. Only traces remain: stones, stories, and what lies beneath the sea. But the Lighthouse of Alexandria did not disappear completely, because the name Pharos still lives on. From the name of an island, it became a word associated with the very concept of a lighthouse in many languages. It is a strange kind of immortality. A structure can be destroyed, a city can change, an empire can disappear, but a name can outlive stone itself. The light went out, but the story remains. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about the Lighthouse of Alexandria was not its height, not the massive blocks of stone, not the fire at the top, but the idea behind the structure. More than 2,000 years ago, people looked out at the sea and realized that darkness could kill a ship, so they built a tower. They raised the light high into the sky. They transformed a small fire into a giant beacon in the middle of the sea. And for more than 1,000 years, that tower stood there. The people who built it disappeared. The rulers of Alexandria disappeared. The ships that once saw its light disappeared as well. But the story remains, because history does not always preserve what we want it to. It does not preserve towers intact. It does not preserve cities forever. It does not preserve empires. It leaves behind only fragments, a coin, an inscription, a block of stone beneath the sea, the account of someone who saw the structure centuries ago. And from those fragments, we try to imagine a world that has disappeared. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was once built to help sailors find their way home. But after thousands of years, it has become a beacon for us, not across the sea, but through history, a reminder that the things human beings build can disappear, but humanity's desire to conquer the darkness still remains. If you want to continue exploring lost wonders, unsolved mysteries, and the historical stories behind the greatest structures of the ancient world, subscribe to the channel, because there are places that today are nothing more than stones. But if we know how to listen, they can still tell us the story of an entire civilization.